Former Pittsburgh Steelers running back Le'Veon Bell sparked a major backlash over the weekend after posting a photo of himself wearing a shirt that insulted Vice President Kamala Harris. The shirt displayed an offensive message that Bell's critics interpreted as a clear indication of his allegiance to former President Donald Trump. It didn't take long for the post to ignite outrage across social media. Many were quick to criticize Bell, accusing him of using misogynistic and disrespectful language to attack the first female vice president of the United States. Bell's wardrobe choice was widely viewed as a deliberate provocation, sparking strong criticism from a range of individuals, including politicians, activists, and everyday social media users. For many, Bell's actions were seen as degrading, disrespectful, and out of line. The backlash was immediate and fierce, with critics not only calling out Bell's apparent political stance, but also condemning his use of offensive and sexist language. The term displayed on his shirt carried particularly derogatory connotations. The fact that Bell chose to wear a shirt bearing such an insult directed at a sitting vice president added to the weight of the controversy. Actress Holly Robinson Peete, best known for her role on the TV show Hanging with Mr. Cooper, was among the most prominent voices to respond. As a longtime friend of Vice President Harris, Peete expressed anger and disappointment, making it clear that she found Bell's message offensive and derogatory. Her emotional response echoed the frustration felt by many who viewed the shirt's message as a public display of disrespect toward Harris, a woman who has broken numerous barriers in American politics. Peete saw the shirt as not only an insult to Harris, but as part of a broader pattern of sexist and harmful rhetoric often directed at women in power. In her repost of Bell's image, Peete conveyed her feelings candidly. She denounced Bell's decision, stating that his shirt represented the kind of language that continues to undermine the progress women have made in fields such as politics. Peete emphasized how the use of such language serves to dehumanize and belittle women, especially women of color who historically have faced greater levels of scrutiny and disrespect. Pete's public rebuke gained widespread support from her followers and others who shared her sentiments. Pete's reaction carried particular weight because of her long-standing friendship with Harris. Having known Harris for over 20 years, Peete has publicly supported her friend throughout her political career. This deep, personal connection likely made Bell's actions even more painful for Peete. Her decision to speak out was not merely a defense of Harris, but also a stand against the pervasive misogyny and disrespect faced by women, especially women of color in positions of leadership. The controversy surrounding Bell's shirt extends beyond the former NFL player himself. It highlights a broader cultural issue, how public figures are increasingly held accountable for their actions and statements. In recent years, there has been growing recognition of the need to call out misogyny, racism, and other forms of bigotry, particularly when directed at public figures who represent marginalized communities. Bell's shirt was widely interpreted as an example of how political discourse sometimes descends into harmful and unacceptable personal attacks. Many, like Peete, felt it was necessary to address this kind of behavior, not only to defend Harris, but also to take a stand against the toxic language used to diminish women in power. Pete's response was also symbolic of a larger shift in the way public figures are held accountable for their words and actions. This cultural moment reflects an increased intolerance for language that marginalizes and dehumanizes, especially when aimed at women of color. Pete's pointed criticism of Bell's actions conveyed a powerful message that the days of allowing such language to go unchallenged are over. The shirt Bell wore didn't just ignite controversy due to the offensive word itself, it also drew attention to the complexities of modern political allegiance. Many found it ironic that Bell, an NFL player, was aligning himself with Trump, a former president who has made inflammatory statements about athletes and racial justice movements. Pete highlighted this contradiction in her response, pointing out how incongruous it was for Bell to support a politician with a history of denigrating Black athletes. Pete argued that Bell's choice to wear a shirt denigrating Harris, a woman who has dedicated her career to fighting for justice, was hypocritical, especially considering Trump's past dismissive comments toward NFL players who protested for racial justice. Pete further underscored how Bell's support of Trump contrasted with the former president's history of antagonism toward athletes who used their platform to protest police brutality. By referencing Trump's previous calls to boycott the NFL over athletes' protests, Pete emphasized the hypocrisy of Bell's actions. In 2017, Trump notably referred to NFL players who kneeled during the national anthem in protest as sons of bitches, a remark that incited widespread condemnation. Trump's rhetoric further fueled division, framing athletes' peaceful protests as unpatriotic rather than a demand for accountability and reform in law enforcement. For Pete, Bell's decision to align himself with Trump while wearing a shirt that insulted a dedicated public servant demonstrated a troubling disconnect. Her critique extended beyond Bell himself, touching on how society often uses sexist and racially charged language to delegitimize powerful women, especially women of color. Kamala Harris, like many women in leadership roles, has faced attacks that focus less on her qualifications or policies and more on stereotypes and derogatory language meant to undermine her credibility. Pete's response was not solely about defending her friend, but about standing up for all women who have been subjected to similar forms of disrespect. Her criticism of Bell was powerful, in part because it came from a place of deep personal connection with Harris, and it served as a call for others to hold public figures accountable for language that perpetuates sexism and racism. The controversy surrounding Bell's post speaks to a cultural moment where the public expects accountability for derogatory rhetoric. In calling out Bell's choice, Pete was contributing to a growing conversation about how language can be weaponized to undermine women and people of color. For Harris, the first female vice president and the first woman of color in this role, these types of attacks are, unfortunately, not new. However, as Pete's response demonstrates, there are many who will continue to push back against such rhetoric, ensuring that these types of attacks do not go unchallenged. In reflecting on Bell's actions, Pete highlighted how disrespectful language toward Black women in power is part of a broader issue in society. Pete's statement wasn't just a defense of Harris, it was an appeal to all Black men and others to recognize the harm of misogynistic language and to stand in solidarity with Black women. Her response resonated as a broader call for unity, reminding people of former President Barack Obama's frequent calls for mutual respect and support within the Black community. Pete's powerful rebuke of Bell is emblematic of a larger cultural dialogue about respect, inclusivity, and the treatment of women in positions of power. Pete's comments on Bell's choice of wardrobe and political stance were a rallying cry, underscoring the need for accountability, respect, and solidarity in a time when women, especially women of color, continue to face discrimination. Michelle Obama, the wife of the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama, led the nation in style and grace in the White House from 2009 to 2017. But for many Americans, Michelle is their forever First Lady, a role model who dedicated her life to public service. A graduate of not one, but two Ivy League universities, Michelle gave back to her hometown of Chicago as a working mom before decamping to Washington, D.C., where she effected change as First Lady, a public figure admired for her smarts, poise, and impeccable fashion sense. But the road to the storied East Wing of the White House wasn't entirely smooth. From dealing with tragic loss to learning early on in life about society's harsh realities, Michelle has been a fighter from day one. This is the story of her remarkable evolution, from a girl from the South Side of Chicago into one of the most admired women in the world. Michelle Obama was born on January 17, 1964, in Chicago, the city she has continued to call home for most of her life. In her 2018 memoir, Becoming, Michelle lovingly described her quaint family life. I was just a kid, a girl with Barbies and blocks, with two parents and an older brother, Craig, who slept each night with his head about 3 feet from mine, she wrote. My family was my world, the center of everything. My mother taught me how to read early, walking me to the public library. And my father showed us what it meant to love jazz and art. Describing her childhood home as a cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago. In a 2018 Instagram post, Michelle thanked her family for helping me see the value in our story, in my story, and in the larger story of our country. Michelle Obama and her brother Craig were raised in Chicago by their loving parents, Marion and Frazier Robinson. Marion, pictured above right, lived a long life as she watched her daughter ascend to national prominence, celebrating her 83rd birthday in July 2020. Michelle praised her mother in a 2018 letter for the Chicago Defender, describing Marion's commitment to her children's education. My mother became one of the most active members of the PTA at Bryn Mawr, raising money for new equipment, throwing teacher appreciation dinners, and lobbying for classes and strategies that would better serve the neighborhood's children, she wrote. Michelle further described her mom's independence-minded parenting style in a 2019 People essay, writing, "When it came to raising her kids, my mom knew that her voice was less important than allowing me to use my own. That meant she listened a lot more than she lectured." Michelle Obama's father, Frazier Robinson, above left, tragically passed away in 1991 at the young age of 55 due to complications from multiple sclerosis. In her 2018 memoir, Becoming, Michelle described how the brutal disease affected his body when she was a child. Before I finished elementary school, his cane would become a crutch, and soon after that, 2 crutches. Whatever was eroding inside my father, withering his muscles and stripping his nerves, he viewed it as his own private challenge, as something to silently withstand. Michelle, who praised her father in a 2018 Instagram post as a man who taught me to work hard, laugh often, and keep my word, described the pain of his death in a 2015 commencement speech at Chicago's Martin Luther King Jr. Preparatory High School. "Now, my dad didn't live to see me in the White House," she said. "He passed away from complications from his illness when I was in my 20s. And graduates, let me tell you, he is the hole in my heart. His loss is my scar. But let me tell you something. His memory drives me forward every single day of my life." Michelle Obama grew up in Chicago alongside her older brother, Craig Robinson, above right, whom she honored in a 2019 Instagram post. "For as long as I can remember, my big brother Craig has always had my back," she wrote, adding, "He's still one of my best friends today." His sister may be the family's highest profile name, but Craig Robinson has achieved considerable notoriety in the sports world. Robinson played basketball for Princeton, becoming one of the Ivy League's all-time most efficient scorers. After years as a successful business executive, Robinson pivoted back to sports, coaching college teams before working with ESPN, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the New York Knicks, where he's helped lead the team since 2017 as the Vice President of Player Development. Speaking to the New York Post in 2018, Robinson recalled playing a pickup basketball game with his sister's then-boyfriend Barack Obama and calling Michelle afterward to give Barack a good review. "I realized he wasn't selfish," Craig said. "He wasn't greedy. He showed character on the court. I was able to get back to Michelle and say, he seems like a pretty good guy."